Like, I don't know if you guys have been seeing the stuff that's popping up on like Google search results and stuff where all this AI generated random bullshit content, it will just like, it's just straight up lies about stuff now, where you'll do, I saw a search for, I can't remember what it was, but it was a search for just like a fact. It was just like, oh yeah, it was, are there any countries in Africa that start with the letter K, was the search that I saw. And then there was just some random weird website that Google pulled the answer from, and it was just like, it just said no. And it was like the closest is Kenya, which starts with a K sound, but not.
Butterscotch shenanigans. Hey everybody, welcome to episode 439 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam, I'm the miscellaneous programmer.
I'm Sam, and I'm the artist.
And this is a show where we talk about life, business, and working in the games industry. Today's October 27th, 20 Jubilee. Before we get started, we have a warning. There's going to be explicit words and possibly even phrases on this show.
Well, whole phrases. Also, this is
whole ass
Halloween
explicit
episode,
phrases.
right? Because it's the closest day to Halloween that we got for a podcast. So this has got to be the Halloween episode.
It is.
It's not themed like that, but it is though. Just
It is,
according to time.
And the spookiest thing about this episode is that it's the Halloween episode, but it's not even happening on Halloween, which means it's like a jump scare, Like, you didn't know this was going to be a Halloween episode, and neither did we, frankly. Yeah. And that's how they get you,
Terrifying.
It's like ghosts. You can't see them, don't know that they're there. They just don't really take place in time in a meaningful way, So it's basically the ghost episode.
Quick question about jump scares. In horror movies, jump scares happen a lot, right? Where somebody would be, I don't know, they'll be like in the bathroom and then suddenly, oh, there's a ghost in the mirror, right?
Yeah, it's always when they turn around or look up or, whatever.
From a storytelling perspective, I literally don't understand what's happening there. I understand it's to scare the audience. Yeah, but in world, why would a ghost appear and then just disappear? What's it trying to do here? What are you doing here?
Seth, the ghosts have an inscrutable kind of series of motives that they're trying to work with. They're four-dimensional beings, sort of slipped out of time and space in a weird way. Mm-hmm. So I think it's hard to prescribe the expectations for showing up at a party as a ghost. Like, what does that even mean?
That's true. As a fourth dimensional being, for the ghost, in its mind, it just showed up, had a whole conversation and was trying to explain some things. And it even brought some snacks, but you can't perceive all that stuff because that's kind of happening in the fourth dimension. Exactly. So all you see is the ghost is just like, meh, and then it just is gone.
But also it's trying to be polite too, right? Because if it just appears right in front of you, that's true. If you were trying to not startle somebody, you would not appear right in front of them because that would be the most startling thing. So you just kind of appear behind
quietly
them,
sneak up behind them,
sneak up so that when a person turns
them
around,
on the shoulder, gently trying to ease it.
Yeah. That's just ghost culture. That's how they show their respect.
It's but this is why they get so mad though, because then it's kind of like, so in my own household, my wife has one of those classic, even though I live here too, she's like, if I come around the corner or I'm, 3 rooms away, but she sees me out of the corner of her eye, it's always a jump scare, And at this point, it's just amusing to all parties. But there was a period of time where I got really frustrated because I was like, she can't help it, but I couldn't help my emotional response.
Yeah, she's not thinking through.
Purpose. But I'm like, I live here. It's kind of, it bugs me that I scare you every time I'm just around,
and of course it's not about you, but it feels like
about me. Yeah, exactly. That was in my younger days when I was less empathic,
Sure.
Before I was an empath. But it makes me wonder though. So there's ghosts, right? They're popping in, trying to be polite, popping in behind you, right? Tap you on the shoulder. Hey, buddy, I got a message for you. And it's going to be hard for me to say because I'm a fucking ghost. I'm talking across dimensions. It's going to be really weird, right?
Yep.
It's like you decided that what I look like is spooky because I'm just here in the form that I am, It's not my fault.
I'm just vibing.
Right. And then the response every time it happens is the person just fucking freaks out.
Loses their mind.
Just loses their mind. Away. And so over time, now imagine like you're a ghost, you're outside of time. As far as like this ghost's experience, they've probably experienced this same phenomenon, like just every time. Millions of times. Every time they try to communicate with anybody, they probably experience it all simultaneously, you know? So over time,
because they're fourth dimensional beings.
Because they're fourth dimensional beings. Yeah. So over time, they just start to they're like, I'm just trying to be polite here, and no matter what I do, you know, I just get this response. And so after some time, they lean into it. They're like, I guess I am the villain. And if I'm gonna be the villain, like I'm gonna go hard.
Let's put blood on these walls, you know?
Exactly.
Somebody needs to make an RPG type game where you play as a ghost or a party of ghosts, trying to accomplish basic things, but everybody just screams and panics, and you got to figure out how to make friends, how to get a job. It's almost like an Octodad situation, you know, but you have to figure out how to make people not shit their pants whenever you approach. I think, you know, it's a skill. It's a good skill to develop.
Especially as a ghost. It's required. If you want to be meshed into society these days. You can't be making people shit their pants when you
just can't.
But it's the same kind of, you know, it's like in these movies where like the mirror fogs up and there's a message on it. It's like, yeah, well, how else was the ghost supposed to tell you stuff, right? Like,
yeah, because every time they show up, you just scream in their face and slap them, right? Yeah. Like, of course they're going to write in the
way they can do it. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, just because it's a ghost doesn't mean they have ill intent. It's 2023, everybody.
Yeah.
Get your shit together. Come on. All right. Anyways, we were just going to do a bunch of questions. Oh, also, I'd like to thank our recurring supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net, whose monthly donations help keep the podcast running. Thank you very much. We just blew right past that earlier, so we do appreciate it. So we're just going to do questions today. And these questions come from our listeners over at podcast.bscotch.net. And the highest upvoted question for today comes from inside the house. It's coming from BscotchKarl. I love that Carl asks questions to the podcast because like he's always asking us questions sort of throughout the week and stuff to like get more info about, you know, how everything works because he's doing a lot of QA testing and stuff. But he's still taking the time to be like, I think a lot of people would want to know the answer to this. So then he just goes and asks on the podcast page instead.
Yep. That's awesome.
So Carl says, has your ability as a game developer or programmer ever given you an advantage when it comes to playing a game? For example, knowing the basics of how something works via code and going in to edit or modify the game's code to improve your own experience. I've never done that, really.
Yeah, I haven't bothered on the modding side. I think on the design side, yeah, I think just because you're just very fluent, ideally, in all the different designs.
The language of
the language of games,
UI and
so design, you can read them and then make better decisions, especially if there's skill trees involved, that sort of thing. You know, I feel like in my youths, I remember just sort of generally being even playing like Diablo, where you basically had a button to click. I had a hard time picking what skills to use and all that stuff, you know, because it's just, what does it all mean? And now it's a little easier to think about. So.
Now all you do every day is think about exactly that question. So, and you've been doing it for like a decade. So,
so I think in that front, I don't know. I haven't deployed the like particular skills outside the design sphere, though, you know.
Yeah, I think it has helped me when it comes to being like a degenerate min-maxer, I think.
Yeah, which I think is an accurate description of your approach to games.
Yeah. So like, for example,
hearing the stories that Seth has about any game he's played, but especially recently the Baldur's Gate stuff where it gets
well, I've kind of landed. I kind of realized, I don't know, this is like a chicken or egg thing, right? Like, did I become a game developer because I like to do this kind of thing, or did I develop a passion for this kind of thing because of being a game developer? Right. I think it's hard to tell where it starts, but yeah, like if, for example, when I play a Kerbal Space Program, I would see things like I would find out that there's a moon of basically their equivalent of Jupiter that has an oxygen atmosphere, right? And I'm sitting here thinking, okay, can I fly a jet there? Because jets require an oxygen breathing engine, a jet engine, right? And so then I'm thinking, okay, I'll need to come up with a space mission to make a jet that I can fly, that it's like light enough that I can fly on a rocket into space, blah, blah, blah. Make it all the way basically to Jupiter and then fly this jet on the moon of Jupiter and then somehow get back, right? And so if ever I think of something like that where I'm like, I wonder if this is possible, and then I kind of just can't help but
go try to
do it and go try to. So like in Baldur's Gate 3, I'm doing a solo tactician playthrough as a bard, which means normally it's a 4-person game. Like you have a party of 4, and I'm soloing it. So I've recruited the party members, but they just stay back at my camp just for story.
I got this. You guys just hang out. Bye.
Yeah, and I chose Bard because Bard isn't really generally thought of as like a powerful combat kind of a character. And I'm like, how can I win combat encounters, by myself as a
on the
bard
hardest difficulty. Yeah.
on the hardest game difficulty, and I have to be like super creative. I'm about halfway through the game by now. With this playthrough. But yeah, like it forces you to think really in depth about how every aspect of the game works and like come up with strategies and stuff. And I find that like if I'm not doing that, then I kind of lose interest after a while.
Yeah, but that sounds to me like this is one of those the kind of stuff that you're into, like the stuff that gets your mind going, is the kind of stuff that works for min-maxing in games and works for programming, right?
Yeah.
But it doesn't sound like
there's exploring the space.
But it doesn't sound like those two things actually necessarily are talking to each other.
No, it's just two expressions, I think, of the same tendency. Yeah,
because I know for my own case, like, and I think I'm the least of a gamer. I think probably on almost basically the whole team, really. And so when I play games, I like to. It's like purely as like just for fun way to spend time thing, and I've never liked thinking very much while I play games. I've always I like my first person shooters. I like my kind of light RPGs where I'm not really making meaningful choices actually, hence Fallout games and stuff, where I'm just kind of participating in a story that's interesting. And then my moment to moment stuff doesn't require me to think very hard, and I can just kind of like have fun doing stuff, And since I don't like to think very much while I'm playing games, then the fact that I could like think through why things are the way they are from both a design and a program perspective just kind of doesn't really come into play because
you're on vacation.
I'm on vacation.
You're not here to. I feel that.
But I think where it does come up is mostly, I think, similar to Sam, was like design side stuff, because the way that stuff actually gets implemented in games differs just so enormously, right? Within a game, between any two games and so on, that even being a really skilled programmer, that actually gives you very little insight into like how the game works, right? And the design comes way more into play. But I think this is also where I think things like QA and speedrunning, which are honestly just the same discipline, I think those things are the ones where like you learn about quirks of video games in this like really technical way that gets you to more to those questions of like, how do I just make this do what I want, kind of a thing, right? Because of the sheer breadth of ways that things can work, right, in games. And like you finding the little slots in between stuff that's supposed to go. And like, it is the case that if you are a game programmer or a technical game designer, you'll also be aware of those things. But I think unless you spend a lot of time trying to actually fuck with those, then it doesn't really matter that you could if you thought about it, like think of the ways, because the first thing you have to do is be like into that way of approaching games, right? So I think like, again, QA and speedrunners, like that's where the skill is that gives you that. And if that was also informed by being a game programmer, there'd be no end to the chaos you could wreak.
Yeah.
Can you wreak chaos or only havoc?
You can wreak whatever you want, You could wreak happiness.
Havoc. Can you wreak happiness?
Wreak happiness upon this entire village.
Merriment upon this village. Yeah, can you do that? Why not?
That?
Isn't wreaking just doing something with a lot of force? Also, wreak is just a weird word.
I don't know. It's weird. Yeah,
stop
saying it.
I will say there are two things that I've noticed about being a game developer that has kind of fucked with my gaming experiences. One is I know that I rarely try to I don't hack things or anything like that, but I generally can pretty quickly figure out what the designer or game developer was going for, like what the experience they're trying to deliver. And every now and then I do try to explore the bounds of like how far they thought. And so for example,
because you have to give up at some point always.
Yeah. So for example, the game Amnesia, spooky game, Amnesia: The Dark Descent. They do a lot of jump scares. Monster comes out, it's like, "Mah!" and then like runs around a corner or something. What they're expecting you to do is do what the monster did, which is also go, "Mah!" but like run backwards and run away and go around a different corner. And so whenever I'm playing games like that, I always chase the thing that I'm supposed to run from to see what it does. Yeah. So like if you run around the corner in that scenario, the monster comes out. If you chase it, it runs around the corner and just instantly disappears. Yeah, like it's just gone, right? Because like you're supposed to be scared and thinking like, where did it go, right? Or when's it coming back? But it just vanishes. It was there to just scare you. That's it. Yeah. But then the other thing that fucks with me now is now that I know about all the technical stuff of how games run and all that, it drives me insane when people use the word lag to talk about frame rate dips. That is not lag. Okay. Somebody will go, my game is lagging. And I'll be like, what's happening? And they're like, my screen is frozen. I'm like, that's not lag. That's not a network problem.
but it's experienced the same way though, right? Because your experience of network lag for a network or for a game where basically the code is running on a server and then your client is then kind of doing what the server tells it to, right? Your experience with that is the same, which is stuff gets like stuttering kind of or just like freezes.
Well, it's not though, right? Because like a frame rate dip is like it's like the game starts looking like a slideshow. But things are still responding. Like you push a button and the ability happens or whatever. And the reason it drives me crazy is because one of them you can do something about and the other you can't. And it's like if you're having frame rate issues, especially like in a game like World of Warcraft or something, you can reboot the game and it'll like reload your add-ons or something like that, and it's fine. But if it's network lag, then rebooting the game will not change anything. Right. And if you talk about them as the same problem, then you have all these scenarios where somebody will think that something is within their control, but it's not, and then they'll like reload the game for no reason, or
vice versa.
They won't reload the game even though they should, and it would fix it, right? Because they talk about them as the same thing. And every time it happens, I don't know. It's just like it's one of those little nitpicks that I just can't handle. It's just like lag and frame rates are two just totally different things, right? But I get it. Like you're not thinking about it. So I don't know.
Technical knowledge. I mean, my own experience of all of this is that for the most part, the more I know about how games work and how they're designed, the more it gives me kind of like two diverging outcomes at the same time. Where one is I become a lot more tolerant of certain kinds of jank because I'm like, I can see why they decided not to deal with that, or I could see why like they were like, well, if we do try to adjust this, it's gonna fuck with this other thing, and so we're just gonna let that jank be there. But it also makes me a lot more intolerant of certain design choices and certain jank, right? Because I also know like it didn't have to be this way, and I think we've been talking about Starfield a lot recently.
Like the field of view slider in Starfield.
There are certain kinds of things. So I think also as we've kind of like gotten deeper into this career and made more stuff. And especially for me as an elder millennial gamer, where like the classic kind of trajectory that people that are into games kind of go through is like in their youth, you play a game for like 100 hours straight and you fucking love every second of it, right? And then as you gain less access to time to go do that kind of thing, people who are into games tend to just play more games less, right? And so you get this more breadth of gameplay experiences. And so I think the thing that as I get older that drives me the craziest is games that didn't take the time to just give me a smooth experience so that I don't have to go spend that time fighting the game, doing research externally, how to do things or whatever, right? Because where I want to be able to come in and just play the game, just have a good time.
You're coming there to take vacation. So
yeah, exactly.
If it's not a resort and they're like, all right, here's the keys, we'll walk you to your room, here's your robes, slippers on the floor, ready to go.
Yeah, and it's all the little stuff, right? Because it's one of the things like so much about making games is so hard, and so much about the because so much of it is the design of all these like interworking complex components that all have to talk to each other and all be balanced and all this kind of stuff, right? And again, some of the easiest stuff conceptually, like all of it's difficult technically, right? But some of the easiest stuff conceptually is like little micro interaction decisions in the UIs and that kind of stuff, right? Where like if I have
like
to
saving your position in a menu, you know,
yeah, or if I have to press
like
if I have to press 10 buttons to figure out which is the one that's going to open my inventory because it's none of the typical buttons that'll do that in the other games, right? Like that kind of stuff, like just drives me absolutely up the wall. Where I'm actually then, that's the funny thing, right? And so there are certain things I've just become like really tolerant of, and others that I've become, and those are very different things than they were before we started this path. Like before we started this path, if there were unblinking character sprites in a game, I'd be like, I wouldn't even notice.
Hardly notice. Yep.
But now it's one of those things that I hate. Like if I see that, I'm like, they have to blink. They have to.
It's so easy.
Yeah, it's so easy, blink. And they feel so dead. You know, it feels like the life you've not put into this game by not having blinking characters. You know, it's one of those like appreciation for details. Actually, I think that's really what it is. It's like the details that I appreciate have completely changed. And they're mostly about my own moment-to-moment experience in the game. Where in the past, it was just different. It was just different stuff that I cared about.
See, you know, this makes me think of, speaking of blinking as a means of like, if the developer took the time to add blinking to the characters, right, then you're like, okay, like they're invested in trying to make this world feel alive because it's a small touch, right? You didn't have to do. The opposite is true. And I watched the show One Piece, the live action show. Yep. Fucking great. By the way, I didn't know anything about the only thing I knew about One Piece is it's popular. That's the one thing
that's
I
also
knew about
all I knew when I started it, which is fun because we both experienced many surprises because we didn't know we were getting into. Yeah.
As this goes through the first episode of the show, there were about 3 or 4 different times where I would just kind of said out loud, "What the fuck am I looking? What is happening?" But like in kind of a good way, and it's like it's pretty dumb, but like in a way where it recognizes that it's absurd and it just kind of leans into it so hard that it just works. But there's this character in the show named Mihawk, who's this badass swordsman, and he has these piercing bright yellow eyes. Okay. But something I didn't even notice until I had watched a YouTube clip from the show. And I saw a comment in there and somebody pointed out that character never blinks. And I was like, there's like, when you see him in the show, all you feel something about him where like, he's just kind of alien almost.
Yeah, unsettling.
Right? Yep. And like something's unsettling about him. And then you kind of realize like, after all the screen time that he has, he never blinks.
No, that's
ever,
weird.
Right.
Yeah.
And so like, this is kind of the opposite, but it's the same thing, which is like taking that time to put this little touch where it's like, there's this little thing about this character that shows that they give a shit, you know, to go into that level of detail. And most people won't notice, but they'll feel it.
Yeah.
You know,
this is also why, you know, hardcore fans of things get so excited about like little details of things because it should, like the MCU stuff, especially in the first phase. I don't know what the phases are, but I remember there were these little details where I'd see people that were like so fucking pumped about stuff. They would take like a still, you know, from the movie and be like, look, there's like at this point in time, they have this like shot of like this compound. And there's this like pattern out on the lawn because this other thing landed there in this previous moment. And like, they didn't have to like nobody would notice that. So they didn't have to make sure that was in there.
Yeah.
Right. But somebody did.
Shit.
Right.
Yep.
And that's the kind of stuff that like, I think that's what I've grown the most appreciation for. I think in media in general. But in particular in games is that level of attention to detail. And I want to see that in like the game itself, like what the game is doing. But that actually matters a lot less to me today than it being in how I interact with the game. Like that's actually at this point where I want to see that detail the most.
But I feel like those things often go hand in hand because like if the developer is they're taking time to have all these little details and really painstakingly make sure that everything is perfect, they're doing the same thing everywhere. They're doing it in the UIs, you know, all of that stuff. Like I saw this hilarious, very brief Reddit exchange in the Baldur's Gate subreddit where the post was titled like, I finally found something that Larian missed. Because like basically the reputation now is like they've just thought of everything, right? And the post said, so there's this species called the Githyanki in Baldur's Gate or in D&D, and they come from eggs. They hatch from eggs. And so the person's post was like, Lae'zel is a Gith, but she has a belly button. And Gith come from eggs, right? And he's like, they missed something. And then first the exchange was actually things that come from eggs do have belly buttons. For example, snakes, blah, 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 because there's a yolk sac.
Yeah, they're still
attached.
They just have a yolk sac instead of
yeah. So then the person was like, dang it. But then somebody else posted like, actually, if you have Gale and Lae'zel in your party together at some point, Gale will ask Lae'zel about the fact that she has a belly button, even if she came from an egg. So not only did they think of it, they fucking recorded an entire voice exchange about it. Wow. So that's just that thing where like, no matter what you think of, they've also thought of it. They already thought of it, you know?
Yeah. Well, yeah,
it just shows they care.
Yeah, it's exactly it. I think I've mentioned this before. It's because I have a vape pen thingy. It's the same kind of a deal. It's like it's that level of care. It's a vape pen. Its job is to get hot. That's its only job,
is to blow clouds.
Yeah, but they set up and the only way to interact with it is there's a button to turn it on and there's a little LED kind of flower thingy on it, right? But the attention to detail for what that little glowy flower thing does, right? And it also has a little vibrate that it could do, right? So it has this like it pulses in a certain way, it changes colors in a certain way to like just be really informative to you, but in a way that's just obvious the whole time, like what's happening. It turns like the light turns blue when it's cooling down, you know, and it turns green when it's ready, and all this kind of stuff, right? But when you pick it up, it has like a little gyro sensor too. Like again, none of this has to happen, right? Yeah. But when you pick it up, it's like, oh, you must want to use it, and so if it was in the cooling down phase, it goes back into the heating up phase, right? And then also because at some point they were like, well, we got a gyroscope in here and these little LEDs. Right. And so they were like, let's put some games on this bad boy. Like some weird, so it has like tilt-based like Simon Says games built into this fucking vape pen, right?
So you can take some fat rips, and get high, and then just kind of wiggle this vape pen out of play.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's the kind of thing. It's like I tried the game once I realized it was there, and I was like, oh, that's neat. And then I've never again because I don't actually want to play a game on.
Because who cares? This is Simon Says.
Yeah, but it's one of those like it's again that level of attention to detail for the thing. Maybe just like I'm now all in on this product, right? Even though before that I wouldn't have given a shit in the slightest about it's a vape pen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's
people feel it. Who cares? People know when you are thinking about their experience.
Yeah.
It's obvious, right? And it makes them want to reciprocate. Like I went and I bought the like extra $10 collector's edition package for Baldur's Gate, which has some like just some items in it or something that I don't even care about or need or want. But I was like, I need to give them more money. Right. And this is the only thing that they had available, so I just bought it.
Yeah.
Because like I could tell that they give a shit, and I want them to do more. I want more from them, right? So whatever I can do. Anyways, all right, next question comes from JumpykragQuaajoin, who says, Friendos, I like automated testing. It is super neat. I'm exploring the concept in game development. Can you tell us more about the testing processes you have before sending the game to a QA team? Yes.
We'll talk. Well, first we'll just get into like testing, automated testing, what's hard about it in games, and then we can talk about what we're actually doing, right? So with automated tests, you kind of have, there's a whole bunch of things and ways of testing, right? But your sort of two kind of classic ones are your unit tests and we'll call them, there's lots of other names for these things, but we'll call them end-to-end tests as the two kind of big camps. Mm-hmm. A unit test. We got some in-out function thing, like something, you plug in some stuff, you get something on the other side. Pretty straightforward. Usually doesn't take place over time, though it might, right? But some kind of
an example might be like, I have a function that adds two numbers together, and it gives me back the result. That's a very basic function.
Yeah,
that does
very
a
clear
specific
in-out
thing.
Relationships.
Yeah, and whenever you give it whenever you give it two numbers, you know what it's supposed to give you back.
Yeah.
Right.
And most importantly, it kind of works in isolation, right? So it doesn't really matter what else is going on. That thing should always give you the same response.
Yeah.
Blah, blah, blah,
If you give it a 2 and a 3, you should always get a 5, no matter what.
So that's one class of tests, and it's really good to have those because that just makes sure like the underlying core logic of things actually behaves, right? So
what does one of these tests look like? So like if I want to test this add two numbers together function, what would my test be?
Yeah, so you would have basically a whole bunch of known correct input-output relationships. And
so you'd be like, all right, I'm going to give it a 5 and a 7, and I should get back 12, right? So then if it doesn't give you a 12 back,
then you know it's not working.
Then you have it throw an error and
Yep. And you also take some cases where it shouldn't work, or it should have an error, or take some known incorrect answers and make sure that those are not what comes back, right?
Yeah. So like what if I give it a number and then a word? What does it do?
What happens? And so it's basically providing when you basically wrote some code to do something, you had some assumptions about what would be going into it and like what that input output relationship was supposed to be. And so a test is basically, here's a collection of things that I know what the outcome should be given how I designed this code. And then you just run them against it and check them and see if that's actually true, right? And so the nice thing about this is you can do this really comprehensively for like most of the little pieces of code in your code base you could write a unit test for. And then like you can have, when you boot up the game, you just run all those tests, see what happens, right?
Yeah, so these are nice. Boot it up like in developer mode because you don't want those tests to run when the player boots it, but you know.
Yeah, so you'll have like a different developer launch versus that, or if you're doing things remotely on a remote server somewhere, then you'll launch it in a special mode and that kind of stuff. So these are nice because having all those tests in place mean that if you change something somewhere, then you can be confident that if you accidentally broke something as a consequence of that change, you'll have broken one of those input-output relationships. And then when that test runs, it'll be like, hey, this didn't do what you said it was supposed to do, but you can go fix it, right? So the more of these you have, the better, right? Okay, so that's the easy thing. And there's a whole like category of people who will tell you should unit test the shit out of absolutely everything, right? What I will say is that's kind of true, but actually, that's one of those, like, it feels good to spend time doing, right? Because on the one hand, yes, like the more tests you have, always the better, right? Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, that's not where your problems are going to be coming. Like your problems are not going to be coming from the function that adds two numbers together and gives you the sum of those two numbers.
Yeah, and very often, like if you got a function like that, that's so simple, it's just like a couple lines of code. If you have to write like 200 of these small functions, you know, but then each time you do that, you spend 30 minutes coming up with scenarios and writing tests. Like those functions are so simple and so easy to discern whether they're working or not that making a big suite of unit tests for every single one of them is probably overkill.
Yeah, probably not worth the time. Yeah, but for anything that starts getting complicated, you want to jam as many tests as you can in because that's where things go wrong, right? So the problem, though, in things like websites and video games and any kind of dynamic interactive system is that while you can unit test all the individual sort of logic components, what really actually matters is like if I'm trying to sign in and I start from the very where I see a web form, right? Can I end up signed in, right? And that means there's all kinds of routes of ways that things can happen because you can like get partway through the process and then get an error from the server, or you could put in an invalid email address, or you could have a user account already, or you can hit the back button in the middle of it or whatever. There's all these ways now that a person can go through. So this is where the idea of the end-to-end test comes in, right? It's like start to finish, some kind of a process that actually matters. So on the web, usually there's a fairly well-defined finite set of those, like for a login flow. It's complicated, but it's pretty well defined.
It's mappable.
Yeah, until you get into like web app territory. So say you're in like Slack or Favro or something. The number of ways that things can happen just kind of starts to blow up, right? When you bring this into games, it gets even worse. But for two reasons. One is because just the sheer amount of variety of that things can happen just keeps on going up, 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 and up, right? But the worst part is that unlike for, say, the web, which is built fully on standard ways of doing things, right? And everything is exposed all the time. And you can use like a third party because it all goes through a browser. So you can use like a fake browser that is a test environment or whatever, right? In games, like all you actually get on the other side of a game is what's displayed in the pixels. Mm-hmm. There's not HTML you can go inspect. There's not like, and every game has different ways that it ended up getting those pixels on the screen. And so
a different rendering pipeline and
and so you can't
physics
just
logic and
you can't just add tests externally using like some common toolkit, right? That's just not a thing you can do in games. So now every single game developer has to develop their own way of testing, but not just that, also for their particular game. So if you got 10 games, you're not even using the same test mechanisms across your own 10 games, right? Because they all just work differently.
Because they're just totally different pieces of software.
Yeah. So now you take that and now it's like, if you're imagining trying to test a game, like what does it even mean? Like, let's say you want to test the balance of a game. The fuck does that mean? Right? You're like, it's supposed to feel hard when the player goes into this particular arena.
It's like testing the coolness of a car. It's like
I kind of think about this. I kind of think about this in three sort of layers, right? So one is just critical tests, as in like if I'm just trying to do stuff in the game, does it work? Crashing? Am I losing data? Is it even just doing stuff? And then the next level up is kind of like user flow and general functionality testing, where like you're not losing data, the game is not crashing, but are you able to like navigate through the menus? Are you able to discern what to do? Can you like fight creatures and get items and stuff like that? Like basically just. You're saying
functionally, do the parts that are supposed to exist do what they're supposed to do?
Do they do what they're supposed to do?
And does nothing terrible happen?
Yeah, right. And then the top tier, it's almost like a Maslow's hierarchy.
It is.
Yeah. The very top of it is just experiential.
Yeah. Is it actually
like, okay, it's doing what it's not crashing, it's working as intended, but is that even good? Like, is it fun? Yep. Are there typos? Is the balance terrible? And so like you can automatically test a lot of stuff further down this hierarchy, right? Like as you go to the critical stuff, you can add lots of tests to test for things crashing or like data loss and stuff like that. And you can even do some stuff like in Levelhead, we have an automated test thing that actually plays the game for a while. Like it runs through a bunch of stuff. It publishes a level. It goes into the workshop. It plays some stuff. This is all happening on our developer server, so it's not doing this like in production.
Well, so we do this on our build server in particular, right? So because we can run it out locally, but the idea is we can have this like suite of basic tests that when we make a build for every single one of the platforms we have to build on, we can then boot it up in that test mode and make sure that we can get to the other side of all those tests without it crashing, basically, right? Mm-hmm. But that's basically just to say like, because they were testing like platform compatibility, right? Which is again a different thing than this that you're saying like, is it good? Is a different kind of test versus the layer below that, even which is like, is it behaving as intended? But that you have to know what's intended, and you have to know how to evaluate that in a test, whether automated or not, right? But the question focused on automated tests. That is an incredibly difficult question to encode into a test, an automated test.
Yeah, well, and we've had this conversation quite a few times over the years, where like there'll be times where we publish a patch or something, and on maybe like a platform, maybe I don't know, like on Android or something, the game is like crashing under certain scenarios or something. But then the conversation will happen of like, all right, what's wrong with our tests? Right? Like what went wrong with our QA pipeline?
Yeah, why didn't we catch this before it?
Yeah, and the answer is always that's something that we didn't have as part of our testing protocol, right? Because like you can't test literally everything. That would take more time than exists in the universe, right?
The goal is not actually to have no bugs, because that essentially
that's an impossible goal.
Well, it also it puts the priority in the wrong place, because the priority is on delivering the experience, right? Not on making it somehow an airtight piece of software. Because if you deliver an airtight piece of software that no one cares about, then who cares that you made it have no bugs, right? It doesn't matter.
If it took you 20 years to make the only bug-free piece, we were kind of joking about this because I had to do a giant refactor this week of all of the Rumpus web stuff in Crashlands 2, and there were a bunch of places where I found like huge suites of functions that we used a lot in Levelhead, but actually we're not using it all in Crashlands 2 because it's not a UGC game. And I was talking with Adam Sam, and I was like, I could refactor this stuff and rebuild it, or I could just delete all of it. And we're all like, delete it. You know why? Because deleted code doesn't cause
It's the safest code you can have.
Yeah. If code doesn't exist, it can't crash, right? And so that's like always the golden rule of, if you have code, you have bugs. It's going to happen. Yeah. So yeah, you're right, Sam. The goal is not to have 0 bugs. The goal is
well, it's just not even about bugs, right? As in like,
it's about the user experience.
Yeah, exactly. And and so we categorize things based on impact on user experience, right? So data loss, that's the thing
Very
we
bad.
are the most aggressive about trying to have tests for and trying to avoid, right? Because that's the worst possible thing really that can happen downstream to a player is they put 10 hours in the game and it's just gone, right? That's also when they get the most mad, understandably, and give us the most grief. And so nobody's having a good time when there's data loss, right? So that's the one that we treat as like any data loss thing is fatal, right? And that we have to figure out why that's going on and we have to address it. And as many automated tests as we can have trying to check for that stuff, we should have. That's like, there's no investment is too much almost, right? But when it comes to everything else is just like, okay, well, what actually happens to the player when that thing happens? Because the next thing down is like, can they get stuck? Like they just can't do anything. They can't progress in a meaningful way because something weird has happened. Their game has moved into some state where now they just
as a soft lock.
Yeah, they just can't complete the game now because that's basically the same as data loss because like now their save is just broken. They can't play, right? So similar. That's much harder to deal with and figure out because those can come from anything, right? But same kind of a deal. We got to treat that as like this is the worst kind of problem. And then once you get below that, though, everything else is just like we could probably live with it, right?
Just priority. Yep.
It's just a prioritization thing, right? And so the goal isn't to like it's not even to identify all of the things that can go wrong, whatever. It's to basically have an understanding of what is it that truly breaks the user experience and what can we do to maximize our confidence that those things couldn't have happened in the first place because of our design and approach to the coding, right? Or that we can catch them before they go live. And then after that, it's just, and I think the end result of all this is that our automated tests are focused on the things the automated tests are good at, which is, can we boot up the game on all the platforms we made it build on, right?
And then we can have it do some basic stuff. That like every player is definitely going to do in the first few minutes, right?
Yep.
And does it get through that? Does it crash? Do we lose any data? Are we okay?
Yep.
Then it's up to QA.
Yeah, exactly. And after that, it's all experiential. And so our strategy is really just to say, like, as a small team, I would be surprised if there's a team of our size who's invested as heavily into QA as we have, right? We're a team of 8 full-timers. 2 of those full-timers are QA, right? And then we have 4 part-time QA who collectively put in an extra like 10 plus hours a week, right? And we're just continuously testing all the time, just all the fucking time because of exactly this. It's so impossible in games to have any level of confidence about automated tests actually covering the things that can happen that you just need sheer volume of experiential gameplay and of people intentionally trying to fuck with it, right? Which is, again, that's the value that QA brings is they're like, I wonder what would happen if, and then they go do that thing, right? Which, a test suite is not doing. Test suite's doing exactly what you told it to do, nothing else.
I mean, a good QA tester is priceless, in terms of like because being able to just go to just be like, all right, I'm going to spend the entire day, 8 hours fucking with this one scenario in the game from every conceivable angle that I can think of and see if I can make it break, right? And that takes a certain kind of a brain to be able to do that and to keep track of it. And some people find it like incredibly boring and some people find it incredibly interesting, right? And there's not very much in between. So like those people who are very hard to find.
Right? Because let's think about the games. Games are these dynamic, complex systems, all these interworking parts, right? And so it's like you can sit down, you can throw a day of QA time at like, what happens with this door, right? Can I bring stuff through it? Blah, blah, blah. The classic door problem, right? And 2 weeks later, we may have changed something about how fishing works, right? And then didn't realize that there's some connection between doors and fish, right? That now got fucked up in some way, right? And that's the kind of thing where it's like the sheer number of like automated tests you would have to continue writing, right?
The tests would be 99% of the code.
It's just not feasible.
There's no
but
way.
having somebody who just is like, oh, cool, like I saw that fishing changed. I wonder if that fucked with doors, right? It just goes and like tries to bring a fish through the door, tries to go fishing while walking through a door or whatever, right? Like somebody who's can just go try that stuff and see what happens, right? Is in the end actually just a lot more effective because again, like the thing with automated tests is they do exactly what they're told. And that's
I'm wondering if you can fish while inside a building casting out.
No. Well, kind of. There's certain scenarios. Don't worry about that.
Now you get worried at him.
Here's the interesting thing. That'll be fine. That's not going to cause any problems. The
famous last words.
The interesting thing about this, though, because I've been watching YouTube videos of people trying to develop neural net trained AIs to play games. Mm-hmm. So there's one where this guy is like, I can't remember the name of the game. It's like a car racing game, like Trackmania maybe. Mm-hmm. And he's like, can I make a Trackmania AI that can beat me consistently? And so he's using a neural net with a reinforcement learning with human feedback to train it. So it basically it's an AI that knows nothing about the game other than just the very small number of sort of like reward protocols that the author of the AI puts in, right? So it's like read this number in the top left corner. That's your time, right? And like you need to keep that number low, and you get bonus points if you finish the blah blah blah. Right. So it's like the way these AIs work is it's just around. They have them reading different things on the UI, and then they whenever they do something that they are rewarded for, then that changes their parameters a little bit, and then they'll optimize toward that. And people have done some really interesting stuff like making an AI that can play Pokemon, making an AI that can play racing games, blah, blah, blah. And they're kind of specifically trained for that game, right? You can't like take the racing game and drop it into Pokemon and it'll work. Yeah, right. But, I think within like a 5-year span with all the things that are happening with neural nets and AI and stuff, it wouldn't surprise me to find a QA testing company that has AIs that will be able to just pop into your game and interact with it similar to how a player does, but you could just spawn like 10,000 instances of these, have them just do random bullshit in your game, and then if any one of them encounters a crash or something, then since it's an AI, they could potentially have like video of the whole thing or just like some kind of a script that you could run to have it exactly like recreate what it did so you can watch the sequence.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about that though is it doesn't get at essentially the fish and door problem, right? Which is like, that's really good for solving essentially the time problem of this, which is that, so let's say at the end of the day, the original Crashlands has like a 40 to 60 hour playtime, right? That is both very expensive to run a full QA test on, like a full playthrough test on. And also that playthrough is only generating one particular play experience in the whole play space, which gets bigger and bigger as the game progresses, right? Because you could have done any number of other things by the time.
Yeah, the number of states you could be at that 60-hour mark, if you had taken all the paths possible to get there, right? It's
basically infinite. Yeah. And so I could see a use case for something like that in these particular cases where it's like you have a longer game that you need playthrough testing on, where, like you said, the rewards you can do these kind of like reward based things where it's kind of clearer.
Yeah, because each AI will behave somewhat randomly,
right? Is my opinion, and here's why. Because there's two ways that these AI systems could work, right? One is they try to be a player, right? As in they like. But they're approaching it's a generic player playing a random game, right? Which means basically they're going to be optimized for doing random shit. Players don't do literally completely random shit. And if you're doing completely random shit, you're not actually exploring meaningfully the game's space, right? Because you'll just be in the same way, like if you're doing random shit, you don't accidentally write a book, right? That's not how that works, right? But you could have a really well-trained model that's supposed to do something like write a book, like an LLM, right? Mm-hmm. And sure, that thing can write a book, right? But can it write the specific book that you're trying to get it to write, right? So, but more importantly, because now let's say, so like a racing game actually kind of makes some sense, right? Because like what's your average player trying to do? The average player is trying to win at the racing game, right?
Yeah,
what kinds of things could happen? You drive on a fucking road, right? And then like whatever. So like it's pretty straightforward to imagine like the range of possible ways of playing this game and have those reasonably well represented by some kind of autonomous agent, right? Now, if you go into, let's say, Baldur's Gate, right? Then if you have, what is it that you train this
what's the
AI on so that it meaningfully explores the actual space that players will explore?
That's not what I'm thinking of, though, because it's not about that AI meaningful. It's about, because I actually disagree. I think players do random shit.
It's not
in the
that
aggregate.
random.
In the aggregate. So any given player will do a sequence of things that is predictable for that player and makes sense for that player. Overall, if you have 1 million players, the amount of random bullshit that's going to happen that they're going to like. I read this thread of this person who accidentally soft locked himself in Baldur's Gate, and then they listed the sequence of things that they did to accidentally soft lock themselves, and it was the wildest series of insane decisions and blunders that I have ever heard of. And they had to do like 14 really weird things that nobody's ever thought of doing back to back to make this thing happen. And they didn't even realize that they had soft locked themselves until 100 hours later of gameplay. Right. So it's like, yeah, any given player is going to generally follow a fairly predictable, golden path kind of a thing. But if you have AIs that essentially behave somewhat like a player, but also have like a high degree of kind of chaotic randomness to them, and if you have a lot of those AIs running, then you can capture some of these weird scenarios.
And here's my argument is you won't, because the problem with the random space of things that could happen in a game is that it's basically infinite. And that also means that if you throw randomness into randomness, right? If you're like, let me make this random robot that just walks around pressing inputs and, following storylines or whatever, right? And then you just try to throw because like now you're basically, it's a volume game. You're basically saying like, I think I can throw enough robots doing random stuff at this that I can capture what 1 million players would do, right? My argument is there's not a fucking chance in hell that you can do that because the sheer... It's like being like, oh, if we had enough monkeys typing at typewriters, we could write Shakespeare. So let's like get a whole bunch of monkeys until we get one that writes Shakespeare, right? It's like, no, that's not actually how that works though, right?
Well, what I'm saying though is like, it's not about monkeys on type, because like monkeys can't write. They can't.
You could train monkeys to write a few words and see what happens.
So, well, I guess what I'm saying is like, and AIs can be trained, and they are getting more sophisticated and smarter.
Sure.
Over time.
But that's my point, is there's not going to be like, here's our generic AI farm that you can throw your game at, right? And we spit out, unless we're talking about true, real, general AI, which is still not even on the radar. I know people argue that it is. In my opinion, no evidence that that's even close to on the radar right now. If we had that, sure, because those are just people now, right? So fine. But until that point where AIs are people, my point is you would have to, and I'm not saying like people won't be doing this. What I'm saying is the amount of investment required to do it versus like hiring a QA
is currently high.
Yeah. It's gonna stay really, because it's also gonna be an expertise domain too, right? Where because again, if this was websites that all have like common tech, it's all exposed, etc., I would also buy into this argument more, because there would be things that you could do in this more generalized ways that people could hook into, right? But this is an interaction between this like bespoke, because every game is a bespoke piece of software that, again, mostly you're looking at pixels. So it's going to be this like bespoke training for every single game scenario. And it has to be, because what it means for players to interact with games differs so dramatically depending on the game, right? So I don't disagree this is the kind of thing that will happen. And there will be services that do it. What I'm saying is they're not going to be turnkey, and they won't be ever. The cost will go down because people will get better and better and better at figuring out how to train these things, how you need to redesign your game to expose the stuff that allow these things to work and so on. But then to train it, now you have to train against every single one of these individual games, which means spending enormous amounts. Like, so this is the kind of thing that might become part of QA's job is
training AIs.
Exactly. Yes. And that I can buy, and I think is not unrealistic and probably the kind of thing that's going to start happening. But
yeah, that's kind of how I'm envisioning.
Yeah, it's going to be. It's not going to the cost. So basically, all I'm saying is it's not going to be a general thing because this is not a generalizable problem. And the same with it writing, just that you writing tests for your own code isn't a generalizable problem, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think about it like, VS Code is a general tool that allows you to write whatever code you want, right? But you still have to like learn the code and like do some, like actually write it yourself, right? So I think about it kind of the same way, which is that in the shorter term, there's probably going to be some companies that like start to offer this where you as the developer would probably have to spend a pretty healthy chunk of time, like weeks working with parameters and trying to get these AIs to a point where they could actually like do some stuff in your game. Because like if you watch these videos about the AIs like playing Pokemon or like these people worked on these AIs for months.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And months, like tweaking their parameters and trying to get them to be able to do stuff.
And they
usually
couldn't have
they don't
taken
quite
the thing,
get there.
Yeah, they couldn't have taken the thing they made and be like, okay, go play chess now, right? Like it's not.
Yeah.
It's not.
But also like this kind of it reminds me of like the Human Genome Project, where like sequencing the first genome took like a decade or something, and then now it's like minutes. And so it's just one of those like it's going to be insanely labor intensive and very impractical and expensive for almost everybody at the outset. But as the tech gets smarter and more efficient and faster, and also like if let's say you've got an AI that's trained up to play Diablo 6 or whatever, right? It's possible that you could somehow sort of like adapt that model to a similar kind of hack and slash RPG and take some of the same kinds of like reward structures and stuff and use that to kind of like as a starting point and accelerate the training for next games, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think I have I generally agree with that stuff, but I have sort of 2 points of caution around it. Because I agree, this stuff is going to start.
I think there should be infinite points. There's of caution,
infinite, but I think the 2 biggest ones, though, unless I forget them while I'm talking, which is constantly happening to me.
Yeah, are one for sure.
Are that since this is such a bespoke problem, what we're first going to see is the charlatans. That's what's going to happen first. So my big argument right now is if you see somebody claiming that you can hand them your game and they're going to do testing using AI, run the fuck away, give them no money, right? They are not going to give you any good results. It's not going to happen. And so that's number one. And then number 2 is just because it's AI and just because it's testing your game and just because it's trained on your game and just because it does run certain kinds of tests well does not mean it's actually a replacement for
it's not comprehensive
human stuff. And there's no such thing as comprehensive testing. That's an important point, right? But the question is, you always have to be asking is, what are you trying to test and why? And does the testing mechanism that you have actually test that, right? Because even once people are using a lot of AI systems to test their games, what are they testing at that point? They're testing what they trained on. They're testing what they put all the levers they pulled to say, here's the reward.
Which is how tests currently work.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's the same thing, just at scale, right?
But it's the same. So you'll have made like an autonomous system that can do it, but it's actually reflecting a subset of players, right?
Don't think it's a panacea basically for your testing needs.
And so I think it's going to be one of those things that like, just like with all this AI stuff that's happening, I think it's going to be one of those toolkits that as it develops, as it becomes accessible, it will start to become indispensable where you can really leverage those things to accomplish a lot, right? But if you are thinking the same way that a whole bunch of like websites and stuff are like, hey, we can fire all of our editors now because ChatGPT exists, right? Or whatever. It's like, no, that's not. No, that's not. That's not actually what these are for. And that doesn't give you the outcome you think it's giving you. It's not giving you good results that are now cheaper. It's just giving you results that are better than if you had a monkey doing it, right?
Yeah. The AI does not have curiosity. It does not have fun.
It does what you
care, right?
Yeah.
So like, it's not a player. It's not a journalist. It's not an author.
Yeah.
It's a robot. It's a very sophisticated robot, but it doesn't give a fuck.
And
It's just gonna do what you tell it to.
And importantly, you can make the same argument for people doing QA, right? So this isn't really even about AI like not being sufficient or whatever, because you can have a bad QA tester that only tests dumb things that they shouldn't be testing that don't reflect what the player's going to do, right? That's also true, right? But we already know that, though. We already know that you could have a bad tester. Like, that's just ingrained in our brains. Yeah. The thing that I worry about with all this stuff is that people will
assume that AI is just good.
They will assume that AI is just good.
There's a little halo around it, right?
Yeah, and I think the most important thing you can do is, even though none of the AI stuff that exists currently or is even on the radar is even remotely general intelligence,
it's not ready.
Right?
It's not ready for it.
Still treat it like a person, though. If you treat it like a person, the same way you would treat hiring a person, right?
Check the word.
It's way cheaper than hiring a person. That's true, right? But it's still just a person, though. At the end of the day, in terms of like, you're asking it to do something for you. It's going to do something for you. Maybe good, maybe bad, but treat it the same way you would a person.
Until such time as when I go through a self-checkout and it can correctly identify when I don't have items or do have items. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Or can tell what the fucking item is, you know?
Yeah. Until such time as it isn't just randomly being like, please place the, I'm like, I'm done though.
The funny thing about that is I definitely completely understand what you're going for, but these are two completely different technologies. I understand that where you're like, it seemed they're both the same in the sense like it's a robot trying to do something a human's doing, right? Yeah. So like I definitely understand the analogy. Yeah.
One of the
I do think that if one of them works, the other should work.
Yeah, well, and I think this is where like the AI stuff, like this is why I use it. I love it. I think it's great, right? But I use it as a very skeptical person for that same reason, because the thing that's different about like about the checkout line, right, is that you instantly know if the thing is full of shit. Instantly.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And with all the cool AI stuff that's going on right now, including future automated game testing and whatever, right? It's not at all obvious. Yeah, in fact, it's really hard to tell. In fact, you have to dig deep to find out if it's full of shit or not. Mm-hmm. And that's where I think all of the risks come into play. And again, this is where the charlatans come out of the woodwork. So the main reason I always start with a pessimistic, negative view on like all AI stuff, it's not even about AI. It's because of how the charlatans are going to use it and how people understand it. And they treat it like an oracle / source of truth or whatever, right? When because as long as you don't treat it like that, as long as you treat it like like imagine hiring somebody off of like a random website, right? If that's how you treat it, then you can use it really effectively and it can be great, right? But if you treat it any other way, you're going to be suddenly finding yourself in just the worst possible situation and being like, oh no, how did I get, like, I don't know if you guys have been seeing the stuff that's popping up on like Google search results and stuff where all this AI generated random bullshit content will just like, it's just straight up lies about stuff. Now you'll do, I saw a search for, I can't remember what it was, but it was a search for just like a fact. It was like, oh yeah, it was, are there any countries in Africa that start with the letter K was the search that I saw. And then there was just some random weird website that Google pulled the answer from, you know, and it was just like, it just said no. And it was like the closest is Kenya, which starts with a K sound, but not, but not, or it was like some weird ass answer like that, you know, because again, these things aren't giving you truth. They're giving you statistically likely sequences of letters, right? And now this is like everything's being, because again, if you treat it like that versus the tool that it is, then this is the outcome that we get, right? And so I'm just very.
It's that fucking thing from Adventure Time that has approximate knowledge of many things.
That's exactly what it is.
You know,
I love that little villain. So good.
It's the villain where it's like what.
He tries to pounce on him, but he like jumps behind a different stalactite. The guy's hiding behind.
like it knows that Finn is behind a stalactite, but it doesn't know which one. Yep. Right? It's for some reason it knows part of it, but it doesn't know all of it. Yeah. But that's always all the time. That's how this like being operates. It has just some amount of knowledge of everything, but it doesn't know everything about everything. So it just kind of makes shit up to fill in the gaps. Yeah. So, you know, it's and the only way for an AI to be actually all knowing is if it actually did have a full record of all information, which
importantly though,
impossible, right?
But there's a reason it's impossible, which is that there's two reasons. One is you got to get access to it, but the other one is the information that exists isn't true, right? Like,
yes,
there's no training set out there that like here's a bunch of just literally true stuff, right? So
capital T truths,
yeah. There's at best everything is a reasonable model of the truth, right? But that's also far from the truth about what the data is that's actually out there. The data that's out there is mostly just wrong. It's mostly
I think you can say
flat
that
wrong.
Kenya starts with the letter K.
Kenya starts with the letter K.
You can say that. That's a good
It
truth.
does.
There's some
Unambiguously. Yeah, there are some, but there aren't general truths in the way that, like, because you need to train these things. You just need so much fucking data, right?
Yeah.
And there isn't a source of truths out there that represents like human knowledge, right? Because there's no such thing as human knowledge. That's not a thing that exists, right?
Well, I mean,
there's
there
not,
is.
there's
It's
not
just
a
a wibbly
corpus.
wobbly.
Well, it's every human has their own knowledge, and the internet has like the collection of all the things that people have said publicly on the internet, right? And whatever. Like, if you collect all those things together and call that human knowledge, what you have is 99% bullshit, 99.9% bullshit, or bespoke one-off things that aren't knowledge in a meaningful
Not really
sense.
applicable
Yeah, it's not
in
applicable
any
to
other
the situation.
context.
And then this tiny, tiny little bit that's like actually quote unquote true, right? But that's so non-representative. Like the data that we have isn't representative of the truth, and it can't be, and it never will.
And
be.
it's a statistical model too. So if you ask it like,
it's
if you ask it
statistics.
about whether Kenya starts with a K, like how many people are having that conversation on the web about whether Kenya
apparently
starts with
not
a K?
enough of them.
Not very many, because why would you even ask that? If
Yeah,
you're
yeah, it's
spelling,
like-
if you're spelling the country, you know what the first
in
letter
fact,
is.
the more true a thing is,
the less
the
likely
less
it's
it's
going to
talked
be
about,
debated.
and therefore the less that AI could ever know about it.
Yeah.
So you know.
Water is wet. We don't really need to spend much time talking about that fact. So
The
that
only
is not
time we
gonna
do, it's
be-
talked about as a joke, you know? So like,
Yeah.
if you start talking to an AI about the wetness of water, I don't know what would happen. I've never tried that, but like,
What about ice, though?
I'm still not sure if
know what I'm
water
saying?
is wet. I know water makes things wet, but
That's
I don't
what
know
I'm
if
getting.
water can
Water
be
has
wet.
multiple forms, so you got to be a little more specific.
yeah, I think
You're saying water's not
wetness is the existence of a thin film of water on a non-water surface.
Right.
wet. But can other liquids make things wet? I'm pretty sure they can.
Nope.
If you
There it is.
spilled
It's a
if you
hard
spilled
truth.
some oil in your water, you're like, oh, I got my water wet.
No, it's like, if
Or
you spilled
did you
oil
get your
on your
oil wet?
water, you made your water oily, is what you did.
Yeah, and you made your oil wet.
No, you didn't.
Well, no, I
'Cause
guess
the
you
oil's
didn't.
on top
Are
of
you
the
saying-
water.
Are you saying wetness can only come from water?
That is what I'm saying.
I don't believe that for a second. I
Yeah,
feel like
Sam, as somebody who's
there's-
probably gotten peed and pooped on quite a bit.
Hey,
over
here's the thing.
past,
let me tell you, there's a lot of liquids.
Pee is just water. Pee is just water. If
I know pee is
it's
water. I'm saying
watery
that.
enough to make something wet, it's just water now.
So what about
It's just
like,
water now.
mercury, for example, can't make things wet because it doesn't like get in
Nope.
there.
Doesn't get in
It
there.
goes through stuff and it's liquid.
Wetness is about
It's
surface
still a
tension.
liquid, yeah, but it's got a different kind of surface tension, yeah. And yeah, it's just it's not wet.
I mean,
Like you
there's
wouldn't
other
touch
wet
mercury and be like, "Ooh, that was wet." You'd be like, "I got fucking mercury on my
I'm
finger."
gonna die.
Yeah.
but what about what about liquid sulfur or something? If you get liquid sulfur on you, are you wet?
Liquid sulfur. Oh, you mean no, at that point you are, I think, melted.
I mean, you might be dead, but are you wet?
You died. You died before you could have been wet. It's just,
I understand.
You have
priorities
made
are
other
different.
things wet because you melted onto them.
yeah,
you know.
yeah, with all of your
Did your-
internal water-based juices.
As a puddle, now you are the wettener.
I said,
you
does
know?
your blood make the sulfur wet? I don't know. These are the questions.
Only if
that
it's
I
on
need
the
answers.
surface of the sulfur, because wetness is a thin film. Because once you thicken that film up, now you just got a puddle. You know what I mean? Like puddles aren't
So I
wet.
guess-
Puddles are made out of water. It's a different thing.
So I guess to wrap it up, then we don't even know. We don't even know if water is wet, and that's an unsolved question at this point.
People
so if we don't
debated
even know
this over
that,
the eons. You know.
Yep, same thing.
if we don't even know yet that, then how can we possibly say what the first letter of Kenya is? You know what I mean?
Can't.
We don't know.
It certainly makes a K sound, though. That's all I could say.
It could.
Yeah, because I think if I recall correctly, that
might
answer
make a C sound.
That answer finished with that Kenya starts with the K sound. Was that it's like the end of
Which
the
is
explanation.
fair.
Which is not wrong, but also
That's a fair assessment.
but also doesn't mean that it doesn't start with the letter K. You know.
I mean, there's probably a bunch of different ways to write out the name of Kenya in different
Yeah,
languages.
the way that it wrote it in its answer was with the letter K. Just to
well, with the K sound. Let's not
sorry,
get
yeah,
carried
with the
away.
K,
Carry away there.
with the K sound that they spelled with the letter K,
Yep.
which is different than it actually
different.
starting with. The letter
Yeah,
K.
it's a whole different
That's
thing.
a different concept. Yeah.
So,
Although
anyway, that's all the time we have.
If you ever dig into, I'm gonna just fit right this. If you ever dig into
Okay,
anything
yeah.
about fucking languages, though, like the difference between them. So I was just reading about UTF-8
Mm-hmm.
recently, which is like how you encode all the different fonts or all the different characters in the world, right, into a single alpha or whatever, so a single set of characters. And that shit is so like if you were to tell me like Kenya doesn't start with the letter K and then told me that in computer terms, I'd be like, I believe you actually.
That's fair.
That's probably true.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
It might start with an emoji.
Could start with
or some
anything.
kind of weird twisty
There's just no
thing.
way to know.
I don't even know what it is. Yeah. So anyway, language is confusing. We don't know anything. Knowledge isn't real. That's a good place to leave it for the week.
Very spooky.
I like it.
I'm freaked out.
We'd like to thank our producers, Fat Bard and Sampa DaCosta, for putting the podcast together, and thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, you can just go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the Discord, a way for you to donate, and links to the archives. And as always, head on over to Steam and give Crashlands 2 a wish list. It helps us out a ton, helps the game get more visibility, boosts it in the store algorithm.
Yep.
All that stuff. We really appreciate that. So thank you very much. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.